Your lecturer is Eamon Guerin. Mr. Guerin is a professorial lecturer in African Studies at Johns Hopkins University School of Advanced International Studies in Washington, D.C. He received his M.A. in Near and Middle Eastern Studies and Arabic from the School of Oriental and African Studies at the University of London. Mr. Guerin has published extensively on Middle Eastern history, culture, and contemporary politics. He is a regular reviewer for the Times Literary Supplement, the author of The Sahara, A Cultural History, and a contributor to the Encyclopedia of African History, Meetings with Remarkable Muslims, and Sahara Overland.
Many years ago, I made a number of journeys across the Sahara on the back of a small fleet of camels. I was wandering in Egypt's western desert, which is an area about the size of the Indian subcontinent and one of the driest climates on Earth. This was before September 2001, and the world was, in some ways, a very different place then. These were beautiful and magical journeys, sometimes undertaken in the company of the local Bedu, or Bedouin as they're known in English. The Bedu taught me how to care for my camels and also to navigate the desert by both day and night. I remember one night, about 2 weeks before Christmas, curled up in a down sleeping bag with my teeth chattering even as a small fire blazed next to me. The camels had only recently arrived from warmer climes in Sudan and were no happier than me. But I've never seen stars shining half as bright as I did on that desert night. Alone with my thoughts, I wondered who else might have come this way. Did Alexander the Great once sleep nearby? Did Ibn Battuta walk this trail? Today, most Bedu are settled across the Middle East. And while some remain semi-nomadic, meaning that they maintain a base camp, but practice seasonal migration when they live in temporary or portable dwellings, there are very few true nomads among them. For this reason, I was especially fortunate and grateful to learn from people who still had some native connection to the desert. Among the most important lessons I learnt in the desert were the Arabic names for numerous stars. 2/3 of all stars that have names have Arabic names. This knowledge helped me to safely circumnavigate hundreds of miles of otherwise uncharted landscape. And not only did the stars help me to locate my position in the desert, that at times seemed to be all but featureless, but their Arabic names also helped me learn some interesting new Arabic words. Among the names of these stars were Betelgeuse, which means the hand of the giant, along with Al-Ghol, or the ghoul, Aldebaran, the follower, and Vega, the plunging, as in eagle. The story of how and when so many stars attracted Arabic names is among the many often overlooked narrative treasures from a period in history that we know today as the Islamic Golden Age. Now, I recognize that in many parts of the globe, almost anything referring to Islam is immediately seen as by some, these days, as controversial or negative, perhaps something to be challenged. The term Islamic Golden Age, I know, is no exception. But before I explain why this period in history is called what it is, as well as what the term does and does not mean, I'd like to highlight some of the stories, people, and places that we'll meet in this course on the history and achievements of the Islamic Golden Age. Let me begin, though, by acknowledging that undertaking such a study dealing with the Islamic Golden Age is quite a challenge, dealing, as we will, with vast stores of information. I might offer you a long but plain list of names and dates, but that would only guarantee that you wouldn't be listening after 5 minutes. So instead, to marshal the material that we do have at the ready, and to give you some idea of what many and wonderful treats lay in store, I'm going to enlist the help of the English poet and, if you'll hold your applause for a moment, a winner of the Nobel Prize in Literature, Rudyard Kipling. Most famous for The Jungle Book and his poem If, Kipling also wrote these wise, witty lines. I keep 6 honest serving men, they taught me all I knew. Their names are what and why and when, and how and where and who. What, why, when, how, where, and who. With these honest gentlemen serving as our guides, let's begin by asking, what is a golden age? The answer goes something like this. The ancient Greeks were the first to employ the concept of a golden age. And to the Greeks, the golden age described a mythical past time, an era when men and gods lived together in harmony and all was right with the world. And ever since the Greeks coined this term during the 6th century BC, it's been used as a reliable metaphor for countless places, empires, and fields of endeavour. For instance, the Golden Age of Spain is reckoned to have started as early as 1492 and to have ended no later than 1659. The Golden Age of children's literature started around the middle of the 19th century and ended some 80 years later. Obviously, calling something the Golden Age is saying that it was the best of its kind, as opposed to the runners-up, silver and bronze. The idea of a golden age also conveys an important sense of growth and progress. Frequently, this achievement involves building on past glories while also being progressively forward-looking. Does this always mean progressive ideas? Not at all. Consider the complex character of the Sunni Muslim Caliph Al-Ma'mun, who ruled for 20 years from 813 to 833. His capital, Baghdad, was probably the largest city on earth, and his empire was the world's most powerful. This era of the Abbasid Caliphate is often seen as the pinnacle of the more than 500-year Islamic Golden Age, from 750 to 1258. And Al-Ma'mun was deeply imbued with non-Arabian ideas, notably Greek and Persian. One result of this was his heavy investment in research and scholarship. He filled Baghdad with the world's greatest intellects, and they continued the important work of scientific and cultural advancements that Al-Ma'mun's father, Harun al-Rashid, had set in place when he established the House of Wisdom during his own reign from the years 786 to 809. Now, if this was the peak of the Islamic Golden Age, then one might expect nothing but peace, prosperity, and enlightened thinking. But there's more to the story than that. Al-Ma'mun was driven in his search for wisdom by Greek rationalism, a school of thought that dealt with logic and observation, and which he believed held the key to unlock most branches of knowledge, including religious faith. However, Al-Ma'mun's faith in rationalism, so to speak, brought him into direct conflict with many powerful and religiously conservative scholars. So what happened? Well, Al-Mamun and his emergent Sunni Islam branch of the religion in Baghdad had already displaced its predecessors, the Sunni Umayyad branch in Damascus. And en route to developing the Baghdad-based Abbasid Caliphate into the world's largest empire of the time, Al-Mamun's ideas of rational philosophy and scientific inquiry vis-à-vis religion clashed with the traditionalists' view that revelation alone was sufficient for the faith. Stated plainly, Al-Mamun argued in favour of a more rationalist approach and more original scholarship. And to cut an even longer story short, he attempted to undermine the authority of the traditionalist religious scholars by instituting an inquisition. So, anyone who refused to accept the caliph's rationalist and free-thinking approach was subject to imprisonment, flogging, and even death by beheading, in a fashion not unlike the Spanish Inquisition of the late 15th century for its reach and terror. What an irony! The progressive, free-thinking caliph instituted the first Inquisition in Islamic history in order to force people, on pain of death, to agree with his avowedly open-minded view of the world and his view of Islam. Given human nature, perhaps you have your own story. At the same time, religious debates were only one, often peripheral, aspect of the Islamic Golden Age. Countless avowedly religious men of the age, Muslims, Jews, and Christians alike, conducted advanced scientific experiments in optics, medicine, mathematics, and astronomy as well. For example, the Banu Musa, or Sons of Moses, 3 brothers who worked for Al-Mamun and subsequent caliphs, were renowned for creating hundreds of what they called ingenious devices, including water fountains, mechanical toys, and novelty clocks. Then again, there was the Bacchanalian 8th century Arab poet Abu Nuwas. Often called the greatest Arabic language poet of all time, Abu Nuwas delighted in ridiculing the men of religion and scandalizing Al-Mamun's court with poems in praise of wine, drunkenness, and both hetero and homosexual love. It is said that he spent most of his life in pursuit not of progress, but of pleasure. As these tidbits show, the Islamic Golden Age wasn't one thing or another, but a complex and fascinating period of history that encompassed every area of life and human endeavour. Now let's ask why the Islamic Golden Age got started. This is an involved question, and the period, like all human history, must be seen as a complex mix of factors that came together at one particular moment. One thing to consider is that the Abbasids' military strength at the start of the Golden Age meant the Caliphate was relatively secure. And so, rather than having to spend more on defense, it could shift some of the empire's resources to scientific research. A related idea is that the great size of the Caliphate, which covered the Middle East, North Africa, Persia, and elsewhere, contributed to its economic prosperity. Such expanse also meant diversity, as the cultures, philosophies, religions, and knowledge of Greece, Byzantium, Persia, China, India, and elsewhere were introduced into Abbasid society. Turning our attention to the question of when the Islamic Golden Age was, I must confess that start and end dates are open to debate, as is the case with many historical periods. This is less problematic when talking in the modern era about a particular event, for instance, the Battle of Gettysburg in 1863. But in thinking about historical eras that lack an incontestable start and end date, things get murkier. In this course, I'm adopting certain historical dates to conveniently bookend this golden age, as the dates have been broadly used since at least the second half of the 20th century. This has the Islamic Golden Age starting in 750 with the overthrow of the Damascus-based Umayyads and the rise of the Abbasid Caliphate. The end date I'm adopting is 1258, when a Mongol horde sacked Baghdad and destroyed its storehouse of knowledge and learning, the so-called House of Wisdom. Numerous arguments can be made for alternative dates. For instance, a start date of 762, when the city of Baghdad was founded, or 786, when Harun al-Rashid became caliph. Different end dates have their supporters too, including the first European Crusader invasion of the region in 1096. Others point to concluding dates well after 1258, including as late as the 15th or 16th centuries. So the start and end dates are somewhat subjective. Scientific endeavour in the Muslim world continued well after the sack of Baghdad in 1258, although the overall trend was from the concentration of a single powerful empire in a place such as Baghdad, where centrality and stability had for so long provided conditions conducive to any golden age, i.e. region-wide security and economic stability. Nevertheless, for our purposes, I'm happy to use the most conventional and clearly drawn dates of 750 to 1258 to encapsulate the Golden Age. This is the 500-year period of history demarcated, as I said, by the rise of the Abbasid Caliphate in 750 and the sack of Baghdad in 1258. A somewhat comparable 500-year time span in British history would range from the reign of the Tudor King Henry VIII up to the end of the Second World War. Now let's pose a how question. How did the scientific advances and cultural achievements that lay at the heart of the Islamic Golden Age spread outwards from Baghdad? This brilliant burst of human attainment migrated first across the Abbasid Empire and then to the non-Abbasid corners of the Muslim world. And soon it found its way into non-Muslim lands as well, thereby advancing the cause of learning in Europe and elsewhere. How is an important but easily overlooked question. We might be justified in talking about something resembling a gilt-plated age, not a golden one, if not for the broad transmission of knowledge that originated in the Muslim world during this period. But throughout this course, we'll see how wisdom was transmitted and spread. It began back in the now long-lost House of Wisdom and the translation movement established by Harun al-Rashid in about the year 786. His goal, and that of successive caliphs, starting with his son, the Caliph al-Mamun, was to translate every manuscript and book of any intellectual worth, regardless of its geographical, cultural, or religious provenance. Consequently, the wisdom of the pagan Greeks was acquired just as greedily as that of Byzantine Christians, Persian Zoroastrians, and Hindus from India. This was a truly enlightened and a religious approach to knowledge acquisition on the part of that newly emerged Muslim superpower, the Abbasid Caliphate. Native Arabic scholarship had itself only recently emerged from its infancy. Fortunately, most caliphs employed the good sense to rely on Jewish, Christian, and other translators in the religious, ethnic, and cultural melting pot that the Middle East had been for millennia. One of these was the Christian scholar Ibn Ishaq, whose prolific translations, working with his sons, saw him richly rewarded for his efforts. Another factor in the broad transmission of Golden Age knowledge was the rise of rival intellectual centres during this time, including in Cordoba, modern Spain, Cairo in Egypt, and Samarkand in Central Asia, along with the sheer scale of the Muslim world from the 8th century onwards. Geographers, travellers, and merchants, Muslim and otherwise, were able to move freely throughout the Muslim world during this time, encountering new ideas as they went. One of the most famous of these sojourners was a man named al-Masudi, known as the Arab Herodotus, who travelled from Baghdad to Persia, India, Sri Lanka, and China. The record of his journeys is an invaluable document of the 10th century world. My penultimate question for now is, where did the Islamic Golden Age take place? Or, in other words, what was its geographical range? While Baghdad lay at the heart of the Golden Age in the beginning, the Abbasid Caliphate would eventually lose power at the edges of the empire, including in Andalusia on the Iberian Peninsula of modern-day Spain and Portugal, as well as in North Africa and bits of Central Asia and Persia. In time, as I've indicated, many of these frontiers rose up to become significant centres of culture and learning in their own right. For instance, in 10th century Cairo, the capital of the rival Shia Fatimid Empire, the astronomer and mathematician Ibn al-Haytham led groundbreaking studies in optics and other branches of science, which eventually were important influences on Leonardo da Vinci and others. Further west, in 12th century Cordoba, in Andalusia, we meet Ibn Rushd. Better known in the West as Averroes, here was a Muslim philosopher who defended the rationalism of Aristotle and also became a major and unique influence on the medieval philosophy of all three Abrahamic religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. Here, too, lived one of the greatest Talmudic scholars of all time, Moses Maimonides, the man at the centre of what some have called the Golden Age of Jewish culture in Andalusia. Its end would lead to his flight from Almahad, Spain, to safety in Fatimid Egypt. Now let's tackle our final and in many ways most important question. Who was involved in the Islamic Golden Age? If you think I've hidden the answer not too cleverly in how I phrased the question, you might feel differently if I rephrased it like this. What, if anything, is Islamic about the Islamic Golden Age? What we're confronted by here is the age-old problem of labels. When the Italian Renaissance poet Petrarch labelled almost 1,000 years of European history as the Dark Ages, was he licensed to do so? Of course not. But the label stuck, in part because it's useful shorthand that conveys a degree of truth. When I talk about the Islamic Golden Age, I don't mean for a second to convey the impression that this 500-year period of cultural and intellectual flourishing was driven by religion. These seeds and flowers were planted in earth under the feet of Muslim rulers. But we are identifying place as being every bit as much, if not more prominent, than religious pursuit. This is not a course about the history of Islam or any one of the religions that contributed to this amazing period in human history. Rather, It's about the history and achievements of a civilization that had Islam as its state religion. The Muslim Arab caliphs who instigated and sponsored the Golden Age were among the first to admit the debts they owed to the wisdom of ancient Greece and elsewhere. Wisdom that, in many cases, would have been lost forever had it not been for the caliph-sponsored translation movement. That said, it would also be wrong and ahistorical to portray the Arabs as nothing more than the passive receivers of foreign wisdom, or at worst, parasites who took and never gave. Arab scholars contributed innumerable original works in every branch of science, mathematics, engineering, technology, and most any other branch of learning you care to think of. Even so, it would be just as mistaken to imply that the scientific and other intellectual progress of this time and place was the purview of Arabs alone. Clearly, it was not. I feel unceasingly amazed and personally rewarded by the multi-ethnic, multicultural, and multi-religious natures of the Islamic Golden Age. And I hope you will feel the same way at the end of our 5 centuries together. Bernard Lewis, the British-American historian of the Middle East, once wrote that, before the rise of Islam, virtually all civilizations were limited to one region, one culture, usually one race. The Islamic culture of the Middle East was the first that was truly international, intercultural, interracial, in a sense even intercontinental, and its contribution, both direct and indirect, to the modern world is immense. With that word immense freshly in mind, I'd like to venture back to the Sahara once more, where we encountered one another at the start of this lecture. In those days, when I was wandering about with my camels, I limited myself to 2 slim volumes for my reading pleasure, due to considerations of weight and space. One of these was the Meditations, the brilliant and timeless private philosophical musings of the 2nd century Roman Emperor Marcus Aurelius, whose stoicism proved a welcome companion in the desert. The other was a collection of verse by T.S. Eliot. It seems appropriate, therefore, as we approach the end of this lecture, to quote this line from Eliot's 4 quartets. In my beginning is my end. I began by mentioning the desert and the many stars with Arabic names. The time I spent in the desert remains a formative part of my intellectual and physical development, my coming of age, even as learning the names of the stars was just one dimension of my adventures in the Arabic language. The point I'm trying to make is that distant objects and moments in time are not always as distant as they at first appear. Nor should they necessarily be thought of as unimportant. Even the remotest stars help us to fix the place of our planet within the universe. These prismatic measures of time, distance, and import also become magnifiers when I think back to the time I spent in the desert. Although that was years ago, making it feel sometimes like a distant episode in my life, there's no question that these desert travels in the company of T.S. Eliot, Marcus Aurelius, my camels, the stars, and occasionally the Bedou, played a vital part in making me who I am today. So in thinking about the history and achievements of the Islamic Golden Age more than 1,000 years ago, I believe we should also understand that they remain a fundamental piece in the jigsaw of human intellectual and cultural history that informs our world today. Indeed, one of the difficulties we often face when dealing with the history of the Middle East is that we tend to see the Middle Eastern history as alien somehow. Or else we evaluate the region against the backdrop of contemporary politics, economics, and sociology. Each of these courses of action is flawed. Were we to be talking about the legacies of ancient Greece or Rome, we'd be unlikely to hear objections based on the fact that the ancient Athenians, for instance, didn't speak English. The truth of the matter is that most North Americans and Europeans instinctively appreciate the legacies of Greece and Rome, largely because of what we learnt at school. That we might have no like appreciation of the Islamic Golden Age is usually for the same reason, a lack of exposure to it. The Islamic Golden Age was, at the very least, an essential intellectual bridge between the ancient empires of Greece and Rome and the later European Renaissance that began in Florence during the 14th century. Even the dullest critic is forced to concede that the rebirth of Western European culture didn't happen without the rediscovery of Greek and Roman culture. At the same time, the native Muslim scholars and others who brightened the course of the Islamic Golden Age were no mere custodians of earlier empires. Far from it.